Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 24th chapter in the book of Proverbs. We're going to take it all the way up until the 22nd verse. This marks the capstone of a section which begins in the 22nd chapter, 17 verses, 30 sayings of the wise, and then after that comes more sayings, and then come the Proverbs of Solomon and Proverbs 25, the 25th chapter. We're just going to briefly review. We've been chopping these in half, and the most frequent theme, which abounds in the latter half of the antecedent chapter, the 23rd, is the dangers of alcohol. And by connection, those who drink alcohol. In the 20th verse, be not among heavy drinkers of wine, or with gluttonous eaters of meat. For the drunkard and the glutton become poor, and slumber clothes in rags. So we have to, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. So if you are around people who are living to indulge their fleshly appetites, be it drink or food, you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, and you got to scatter from that company, because the end result is it's not guaranteed that you'll live in poverty, but many people do wind up in poverty for love of drink. And alcohol is not the enemy in Scripture. Alcohol, nowhere is it commanded to completely and totally abstain, but drunkenness is always and invariably presented in a negative and sinful light. And verses 29 through 35, we're just going to read it start to finish. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who feels hurt without cause? Who has redness of eyes? The obvious answer to this question is answered in the 30th verse. Those staying long at the wine, those going in to search out mixed wine. So these people have sadness and quarrels and nothing to brag about, and they're getting them into all sorts of trouble. But at the root of their physical, they have a redness of eye, so they are not physically well, they are not psychologically well, and they are not mentally well. And that is because they are staying long at the wine. They are having more than 2 martinis with dinner. They are deliberately getting drunk for its own sake, and they search it when everyone else calls out the lights. They keep going at it, and they don't slow down. They have no mechanism. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it gives its color in the cup, as it flows smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and stings like an adder. So appearances are deceptive, and the danger and the temptation is to be seduced visibly by the sparkling wine in all its splendor, and then one drink takes a man, then the drink takes the drink, then the drink takes the man, as the Japanese proverb goes, and it feels worse than it tastes. So it's a poor investment. And your eyes look on strange woman, and your heart speaks perversity. And you shall be as one lying down in the midst of the sea, as one laying at the top of the mast, saying, They smote me, I was not sick. They beat me, I did not know. When shall I wake up? Let me seek it again. So even after all of that, the alcoholic has to seek another. Anyone else would call it quits, anyone in their right frame of mind. But alcoholism is a demon, and a demon is an invisible spiritual entity which corrupts one from using or utilizing their self-control or sanity. So it makes otherwise sane people do insane things. It makes smart people do stupid things, and good people do bad things. So stay away from it, because it'll make you do things you do not want to do, and it'll make you someone who you really aren't. But that's who you're going to become if you allow the demon to dominate and control you. So all things in moderation, and if you can't drink moderately, just get it out of the picture altogether. Now, the opening verse of the lesson itself reads, Do not envy evil men, nor desire to be with them. So the temptation to envy evil men is the fact of their prosperity in the world. They are flourishing in the world, and the world does reward sin, especially if you can get away with it. So evil men can gravitate towards the top. A lot of the most envious people, the wealthiest, who are the most envied for their wealth, men in the world, are evil men. But even evil men at the lower level or street level, we should not desire to be with them because they are a corrupting influence and their evil rubs off. So it's contagious. Remember, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. So who we surround ourselves with. If we stay in a barber shop long enough, we're going to get a haircut. If we linger with evil people too long and are not taking a stand for right when we are with them, then we are going to surrender to them and do evil. For their hearts plot to ravage, and their lips talk of trouble. So even before the trouble and the drama begins, it's in their hearts. They are plotting it. They are mapping it out in their mind and in their heart. They are set and determined to do it before they do it, because the heart is the center of volition and will and emotion. And they cannot talk enough about it. They plot it. They talk about it. This is their dominating desire in every waking thought. So, if your lips talk of trouble, that's going to lead to trouble. And the things you speak of are the things that you value. So if you value trouble, you will find yourself in trouble. Trouble for the sake of fun or profit or anything else. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. So house can mean one of two things. It can mean the physical structure, that's applicable. That does require a degree of wisdom to build a house. And the ancients, a lot more of them would have built their own homes. We have specialized labor for carpenters, but it is a great degree of wisdom in design and building a house. But a house can also mean a family or a home. So when we speak of a home, when we're raising a home, we're raising a family and not a physical structure. So that especially requires an even greater degree of wisdom. The process of molding men and women is not an easy one, and it does require wisdom that we can pass on from us to them, from our ancestors. And understanding is the foundation of wisdom, much in a way that a physical house would be established on the foundation of understanding. So too is wisdom the exponent of understanding. It is progressive layers of understanding. So the more understanding you get, if understanding is the ability to disassemble the puzzle pieces, wisdom is to pick apart the mysteries of life. Wisdom is the ability to draw the puzzle together. And by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So knowledge is also an integral ingredient into wisdom. Without knowledge, there is no wisdom. Not everyone who is knowledgeable is wise. Wise people generally have an extensive range and a thorough and consistent range of knowledge from one discipline to the next. And if you have that quality, you can fill your rooms with gifts or physical or spiritual. Either way you can interpret this. Pleasant riches, we can bring spiritual treasures in the love that we bear, or we can bring, just luxurious items. Mighty is the wise in strength, and a man of knowledge strengthens power. So there is actually more power in the mind than there is in matter. There is such a thing as mind over matter. And to be able, now, not to promote the Buddhist religion, but I believe it's attributed to Buddha. He said that the man who can control himself, who can conquer himself, and that is not an easy thing from an objective standpoint, is mightier than he who can conquer an entire city. And I do think there is some truth of that, and it does align with much of what Solomon says. I think in the book of Ecclesiastes he speaks of an anonymous poor person who saved a city through his wisdom. But so wisdom can go a long way on the battlefield, and that forms the connection. This is the 22nd of the 23rd. We started with the 19th one, and the final verse. So these are sets of two, and I've been reading them by the verse. But so far, remember, they are 30 sayings beginning in, or the transition at least begins in the 17th verse of the 22nd chapter. And now we're on the 6th verse, the second half of saying 21. For by wise guidance you wage your own battle, and delivery is by a great counselor. So whether you're waging literal warfare or spiritual warfare, you're going to have to do it with wisdom. You're going to have to know your enemy. You're going to have to come up with a plan. You're going to have to be resourceful. You're going to have to think on your toes. You're going to have to train yourself and educate yourself and condition yourself to survive and conquer and flourish if you are waging battles, be it military or spiritual or anything else. And your salvation can come from a trusted advisor. We have the counselor, the capital letter C, the comforter and the counselor. The Spirit ministers to our heads. He is our counselor, and our hearts, the comforter. So in this specific component, our great counselor, which is Solomon, is writing from a military vantage point, but for our spiritual warfare, we rely on the guidance and the presence and the power of the Ruach Hadesh, who ministers to our heads. He is the Spirit of truth, and to our hearts, he is the great comforter. So, counselor and comforter. Wisdom is high for a fool. He does not open his mouth in the gate. So wisdom is beyond the grasp and reach of a foolish person. They cannot speak it, they cannot know it, they cannot grasp it, they just have no use, and when it comes to them, they're not going to recognize it for what it is. So even if wisdom sinks down to a fool, it's still going to be too high for him to take that reach up. And the gate of the city was where the commercial transactions of the day. It was also the market square. So it was the center in the ancient world of business and activity and publicity. And a fool would have nothing to say conducting commerce or anything else. They would not. They would not waste their breath, and no one would waste their time listening to them in such a scenario. He who plots to do evil is called the master of evil plots. So this connects us to the second and then the first verse. For their heart plots, do not envy evil. So plotting evil, we read the character description in the first two verses, which forms the foundation. Those who are evil are oriented towards evil. Their hearts plot to ravage. And that's going to define their day, because that's their plot, that's their plan, that's their agenda, that's their activity. And this eighth verse is really a self-evident statement. Not everyone who plots to do evil is a master of evil plots, but the one who does certainly is. The purpose of folly is sin, and the scoffer is an abomination to men. So it is almost nonsensical to describe any purpose at all to folly, but here it is identified as sin that is so negative as to be unworthy of even being deemed a purpose, but it does serve a purpose in the cosmic struggle and the cause and effect chain of our own agency. And a scoffer is a level above a simpleton. A simpleton has a blank slate. They're just gullible. But a scoffer has required just enough degree of sophistication to resort to sarcasm, and he scoffs and treats trivially that which he ought to treat seriously. And an abomination is just the worst word you can think of as a term of derision. So no one likes a scoffer. No one wants to be a scoffer. If you're a scoffer, you're an abomination, and can't get any lower than that. If you falter in the days of distress, your strength is small. So in the day of distress, now anyone can flourish in prosperity, but in the Christian life, we have valleys and we have peaks. We have mountains and we have valleys. So our faith will be tested in prosperity if you are walking the Christian life, and that will add the dimension of a foul weather faith to supplement your fair weather. The fair weathers are the ones who only stick with it as long as things go well. They get blessed in their life, and they eliminate the need. They forgot the one who had blessed them, and they forsake it all and run back to their old wicked self, and they're too weak to be much of an effective Christian or a Christian at all. So, as heartless as it may sound to say it, we don't want them because they don't want to pay the price of our warfare. Deliver those taken to death, and hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. So this is something Solomon would have had in his power to do as an absolute monarch. He had the power of clemency. He could execute anyone at will. He could also save anyone who was deemed to be executed. And the death penalty was a very real penalty. It was in the Mosaic Law. It was in most ancient cultures, and it is only controversial, I believe, in our own, at least historically. Death penalty is a standard operating procedure for most civilizations. But Solomon is advising himself and his son and posterity by connection to be merciful in such a situation. So you might not have the power of life and death over someone, but you may have the power to shape their life for ill or worse, and you should lean towards mercy when you do have such power. If you say, "See, we did not know this," would not he who weighs the hearts discern it? He who watches over your life, would he not know it? So there are a variety of meanings and even approaches to interpret this, but the one we're going to take is that ignorance is no excuse. We cannot claim ignorance before him who is omniscient, because he sees thoroughly and totally, and he calculates and assesses in his judgment the things we do know. He knows what we know, and we cannot hide a single item of information that passes through our knowledge from him who is omniscient. So we cannot plead ignorance or we cannot claim our hearts were in the right place. If we let our heart do our thinking, we would. Now, the human heart is effectively worthless as a guide. According to Jeremiah, it is three things. It is deceitful, it is desperately wicked, and it is undiscernible. Who can know it? Incomprehensible. But we do have the iron rock of omniscience above us. He is our counselor, and he does weigh the hearts, and he can discern it. And he watches over our life from the womb to the tomb, and he knows every secret, everything that's ever transpired in our minds, through our hands or our feet or anything else. And he does judge perfectly in accordance. He is sovereign. That means he rules and reigns and is just supreme over every element of his creation, and he will one day reward or repay that man according to the work and according to the revelation they have received. So those who live without any knowledge of the atonement or the work on the cross, they can claim an ignorance that we can't. And I think everyone in the United States of America has at least heard the gospel once. I do believe it has to be told 7 times to make an effective evangelism. So don't give up if you haven't told someone 7 times. But just to return to the chapter. My son, eat honey, for it is good, and the honeycomb sweet to your taste. So this forms the connection. This is the 26th of the 30th saying. It really makes sense when the comparison is connected in the 14th verse. Know that wisdom is thus to your soul, and if you have found it, there is a future. So as physically pleasing and as much pleasure as honey causes to the sense of the tongue, so too does wisdom nourish and tickle and just feed and overwhelm and fill the soul. So wisdom in this sense is honey to the tongue, if our soul was the tongue. And if we find it, there is a future. Wisdom will give us the power to plan a future and the daily vision to walk towards that future. We will be future-oriented people. We will be investing in eternity, but also planning our life, submitted to him. There's a few proverbs that come to mind. A man plans his own ways, but Yahweh directs the steps. Oh, and there's also another sentence I forgot to read in verse 14. And your hope is not cut off. So our future is oriented and guided and determined and defined by a hope. That is our future. It is, eternally speaking, salvation in heaven. And that is our hope. And if we have wisdom, we will know the way. The path has already been paved by the one who could pave it perfectly, the sinless, spotless Savior. Do not lie in wait, O wicked, against the dwelling of the righteous. Do not ravage his resting place. So the wicked, they need to be told not to lie in wait. This is the default state of mind of the sinner, as earlier described in as early as the first chapter, 16th or 18th verse. Solomon describes the type of people he's advising his son to stay away from, those who lie in wait for their blood shall be returned on their head. So if you're striking out the righteous and innocent because you are wicked, they have a powerful ally and an avenger. So, the consequence for ravaging is his resting place is revenge, because they have a powerful ally on their side. For 7 times a righteous man falls and rises, but the wicked stumbles into evil. So perseverance and is the mark of the righteous. Persecutions and trials and tests and temptations come our way, and they may come 7 times, and that number is numerologically significant in the Hebrew numerology as the number of completion or fullness or perfection or for divinity. But that number literally, I believe Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, went bankrupt 7 times, but he did what he needed to do in order to make the world's largest fortune. If he was still alive, he would be the world's wealthiest man. I believe his 6 offspring are habitually, annually, near the top 10 list of the world's billionaires. So that says about, but he had to go bankrupt 7 times, much in the same way we who are walking on the righteous path may need to go to jail or institution or anything else as many times as it takes. We all have our trials. We all have our failures. But Christians make mistakes. Mistakes don't make the Christians. Let your mistakes and even your sins, because there is a degree between mistakes and sins, let them shape you, but don't let them control you or define you. Do not exult when your enemy falls, and let not your heart rejoice when he stumbles. So this would be a sadistic thing to do. A sadistic one is one who takes pleasure in the suffering of others, and we all have a sadistic streak in us. We would like to see punishment, at least a small part of us that, maybe the born-again heart has all but completely suppressed, but we all desire to some extent to see vengeful, violent vengeance inflicted on those who hurt others and wrong others. And we'd all like to see that come to pass in our time. And when our enemy falls, that is not an occasion to rejoice. We don't want to be sore winners because we triumphed over them. And it's just bad blood and bad for business and bad karma, because, do not exult because you know not what a day may bring forth, Proverbs 27:1. So just because one enemy fell today doesn't mean you're not going to fall tomorrow, but rather soberly acknowledge in your celebration of your temporary triumph that the future is still awaiting you. Lest Yahweh see it and be evil in his eyes, and he turn away his wrath from him. So his wrath is not completed while you're still watching, and as the sovereign one, the sovereign judge, he can inflict it on who he will have mercy on you, who he has mercy on, and he will have judgment on him who will have judgment. And if you are rejoicing when your enemy stumbles, then Yahweh, who sees all, who knows all, we read that once earlier before, he who watches over your life in verse 12, so he's going to see it, and he's going to know that it is evil in his eyes. He sees everything we hide, and whether we rejoice silently or in our hearts or anything else. And if we harbor that emotion or that desire or that longing or that delight in our heart, we have no right or reason not to be visited by his wrath for being a sore winner, for wasting away the spiritual benefit of triumphing over our enemy. Do not fret because of evildoers, and do not envy the wicked. This sounds suspiciously similar to the first verse, do not envy the evil. So it's saying, the evildoers, they are running rampant and running amok in the world, but do not fret of them, because their sin and their consequences and their traps, when we are Christians, we are in the world, we are not of the world. We are in the world, not of the world. So we don't, a lot of these headlines in the news are designed to frighten and scare. But we don't need to fret, because our security and our solace is secure and eternal. And there's no reason to envy the wicked, especially knowing the dreaded destiny of the wicked. Remember, this is the question that Asaph took to the temple, and there he found the answer. He saw their end at the temple. So there's no reason to envy the wicked, even though they temporarily triumph in the temporal world. For there is no future for the evildoer. The lamp of the wicked is put out. So they have no eternal hope or expectation. there is no future in devoting this life, because we have a life after this life, which is a lot longer than the life we have now. So if we choose to abuse this life we have, this once in eternity opportunity, and choose to do evil, then we are not going to have an eternal future, and our lamp is going to be put out. That means we're not going to have any light, we're not going to have any life, and it's going to be done, finito. So moral of the story, don't do evil if you want to live eternally, because there is no future, not only in this life, but especially there is absolutely none in the one after. My son, fear Yahweh and the king. Do not mingle with those who change. So the king and the Yahweh was the heavenly king, and Solomon was the earthly king, and the king and the crown were closely connected. Now Yahweh does ordain all rulers on earth, but they were specific covenant keeper kings. That was his role. And he was telling his son not to. The way of the world is the way of change. We're all about the newest, latest update and the latest fad and the latest phone and the latest technology. But we are to find our solace and security in the eternal and unchanging, the rock. And that will not lead us astray. We will be more than conquerors and more than triumphant in his strength. But those who are chasing the latest fad and given to change, that, change is a two-way street, and change is not necessarily good. And if you are changing, if change is your default state of being for anything, then if you're changing just for the sake of change, then you're headed for disaster. And I think that's one of the follies of liberalism. They don't know when to stop, and they don't know when to slow down. But we're just going to close with the final verse itself. For their calamity arises suddenly, and who knows the ruin of both of them? So this connects. This is the 30th and final. It completes the thought of the 21st. So the reason that you shouldn't mingle with those who change is because they're going to invite, through their own change, their own acceleration induced, they're going to invite calamity eventually and inevitably, with all these experiments just for the sake of experiment, without exercising discernment or caution, because they're just so given to change. They're going to inevitably encounter disaster and calamity. And when you're ruined, you will know it, but no one will know you when you are ruined. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.